In this video, we're going to write out a quick example using the FlatList component. So inside of listscreen.js, I'm going to first import FlatList at the very top like so. Then inside of my list screen component, I'm going to build up some array of objects that I want to eventually render onto the screen of my device. So I'm going to create an array inside of here called friends. And I'm going to have that be an array of objects. Every object is going to have a name property, and I'll just give it a name of like friend number 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and so on. So I'm just going to copy that object down a couple times. And I'll go through and manually change each of these numbers. So friend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So this is the array of records that we want to turn into a list. To do so, we're going to remove the text element that we have right here, and I'll replace it with a flat list. When we place a flat list, as I mentioned, there are two required props. The first required prop that we discussed is the data prop. So we have to pass in the array of records that we want to turn into our list. So I'll define flat list right here, and I'll define the data prop and pass in the friends array that I just created right here. The second required prop is called render item. So I'm going to add in render item to my flat list as well. And this is supposed to be a function that is going to be called with every element out of our array. Now, if I start to add in some more implementation for this function right here, this line is going to get really hard to read really quickly. So I might try to multi-line this JSX expression right here. To do so, I'll place a set of parentheses around flat list. And now right in front of each of these different props, I'll put in a new line character. So now it's just a little bit easier to read than what we had before. Okay, so as I was saying, this render item right here is going to be called with each individual element. Now this element argument right here is a little bit misleading. You might think that this element argument is like going to be exactly this object right here. Unfortunately, it's not. The element argument actually has a couple of different properties in it. So if we were to console log this thing out, element would be like this. It would have an item property that was our friend object. So that's where our name with like friend of number 1 would come from. And then it also has an index property as well. So unfortunately, element is not just the friend object. Instead, it's this rather large object that describes a lot of information about the element that we are trying to render into a JSX thing. So usually, rather than receiving this entire argument right here, we instead usually just pull off the item property, which is the actual object that we have inside of our array up here. To just pull off that item property, we'll usually make use of ES 2015 destructuring. So rather than writing out the full word element, we could place a set of curly braces inside those parens, and then just write out item. So that means we're going to get a direct reference to this item property, which effectively will be our friend object that has a name inside of it. So now if we did a console log of item by itself, it would be just name with like friend number 1, or whichever friend it is. Okay, so usually whenever we build out a list like this, we're just going to destructure off that item property. So now inside of this function, we have to return some amount of JSX that's going to describe how we want to show this item right here on the screen, or this friend as it were. So in this case, we might just try to show some little bit of text. Then inside that text, we can make use of those curly braces to print up a JavaScript variable inside there. So remember, item is going to essentially be this object, then this object, then this object, and so on. So if we want to just print up the name, we would reference inside those curly braces item.name. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so now this right here is going to show a list on our screen. However, it's also going to result in a warning message. We're going to save this right here and test it out. I just want you to know that we are going to see a warning message. We'll discuss exactly what it means in just a moment and then fix it up. Okay, so I'm going to save this. I'll flip back over, and there's my list right there. Now, if you try to scroll through this, you're going to notice that it actually has some scrolling functionality. So I can kind of scroll through my list of elements right away. And if you're on Android, you'll see something like that, and the list on Android is not going to be scrollable. On iOS, lists are usually kind of bouncy scroll like this, but on Android, that's not the case. So if you are on Android and you can't scroll the list at all, that's totally fine. Okay, so clearly we can now show a list of elements on the screen, but as I mentioned, we've got a warning down here. So the warning says virtualized list, missing keys for items. So let's have a quick pause right here, and we'll discuss exactly what this warning message is talking about in the next video. We'll also kind of do a discussion around the FlatList component in general and understand better what it's really doing behind the scenes.